So I get to talk about something that sounds awfully dry. It's something called nullification. Another word you might hear is interposition. Like, well, that sounds awfully academic. You know, what exactly does that mean? And I'm just as a little background, I'll introduce you to my wife. My wife is Jenna. She's in the back. She homeschools our 5 children, ages 1 through 13. So we officially have joined the ranks of those who have a teenager. As long as he survives, right? So thank you for coming. Appreciate it, Miss Jenna. What is interposition? What is nullification? Well, it's based on something called the Principles of 98. The Virginia Resolution was written by James Madison, and he talked about how the government has the duty to interpose. What is interpose? Well, it's, stand between, provide a shield of protection. The Kentucky Resolution, which was drafted by Thomas Jefferson, uses the word nullification, and obviously you can kind of get the idea if you nullify something, it's what? It's null and void. It's not appropriate anymore. Why were those written? They were written in response to the Alien and Sedition Act. And basically what the Alien and Sedition Act was, Congress, all the way back in 1789, 1790, believe it or not, they were barely formed and they were already trying to overstep their bounds. So they decided to say that, well, if anybody speaks out against the government, we're going to fine them and put them in jail. That's awfully close to what the Constitution, right? They just signed the Bill of Rights. It doesn't, So what are we going to do? Well, they drafted these resolutions. Not a whole lot happened because what ended up happening was Jefferson and Madison's party came in, they changed things, so not a whole lot happened. What exactly is interposition or nullification? From Thomas Jefferson's resolution, I'll just read one sentence there for you. That whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. That the government created by this compact, the Constitution for the United States, was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself. In other words, federal government, you don't get to define what your power is. That's kind of important, especially in what we're looking at today with all the different things that the government's looking to put in place, not to mention what they've already done. Here's some myths and criticisms. And I have a typo, that's exciting. Myths and criticisms about nullification. I had a chance to review the petition that Ms. Oliver is here to speak about. And here's some of the things that you're going to hear about the concept when you go and hear journalists writing about it, hear people who are not conservative talking about it. They're going to say, nullification's dead. Doesn't exist anymore. It's been disproven. The U.S. Supreme Court says it doesn't exist. The next thing that you'll hear is they tie it to slavery, Jim Crow laws, and segregation. And one of the favorite quotes is they like to quote Martin Luther King Jr. talking about how the governor of, I think it was Alabama, had his lips dripping with talk of secession and nullification. And that's the dark side of nullification, if you will. Another thing that you'll hear is they say that it is a relic of constitutional theory. Well, I find it kind of interesting. Thomas Jefferson wrote in relation to this, he said, when all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and it will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. In other words, if the federal government just keeps gathering power, it's going to be just as tyrannical as King George. Sound kind of familiar? Gathering power? Why should we consider nullification? Well, in answer to what Thomas Jefferson said, I'll quote TJ again. I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. Does that sound familiar? The government keeps telling us that I know better than you do how to take care of you and your children. And I ask you, what right does government have to tell you how to raise your children? What right do we have to have the state of Texas dictate to the rest of the country, with the exception of California, what textbooks are used in our schools? Mr. Reese might know something of that. Is it right? No, but that's what happens because that's how it's structured currently. I don't know about you, but that's a problem for me. That's why we homeschool. We homeschool so we can interpose our value system, so the government doesn't dictate to me the values that my children accept, the values that my children will ascribe to. If we don't educate the next generation, then freedom as we know it today will be gone. You know, another thing that they'll try to tell you about nullification is, oh, it was just this little South Carolina thing, and then there was that whole Civil War thing, and, you know, that stuff didn't really go well. In fact, you know, they basically, they demonize it, they minimize it, and then they try to say that it just doesn't exist anymore. Here's a nice summary of what most liberals would say about the theory of nullification. The theory of nullification was first invented in the 1800s by advocates of slavery. They used nullification of tariffs as a test run in the 1820s. Of course, what they really had in mind was maintaining the institution of slavery against any possible attempt by the federal government to abolish it. Then America fought the Civil War in order to end slavery, but the ideas of states' rights and nullifications were later revived in the 1950s by belligerent white Southerners in an attempt to block the racial integration of schools. The civil rights movement started, and the feds had to step in and force the southern states to treat everyone equally. The end. That's what they would have you believe that nullification is. That is horribly inaccurate, missing volumes of data. And I'm just trying to give you a brief overview as to why the petition Ms. Oliver has is so important. You know, some foundational ideas to consider. Obviously, the 10th Amendment Center. You know, what is the idea of the 10th Amendment? The idea of the 10th Amendment is that there are certain enumerated powers for the federal government, and the rest are reserved to the states. If the framers of the Constitution put it in there, was it important to them?
Yes.
I mean, why include it if you don't intend to use it? You know, they have the idea that, well, sure, the 10th Amendment's there, but it doesn't really apply anymore. I'm like, excuse me? Where'd that come from? You know, what are the enumerated powers? How many of you have read the Constitution cover to cover? Wow, this is an educated group. You know, I actually am formally educated as a history teacher, and I did my student teaching in Center City, Philadelphia. Didn't see half of my first period class ever, and I was there for 16 weeks. I asked the students to write a one-page essay, and these are juniors in high school, and I got pictures, I got crayon, I had one student that managed one paragraph. And one of the things that one of the previous speakers said was, you know, they talk about how there's this problem with minority students, right? And they don't seem to do as well. Well, I would suggest to you that with the advance of poor education in our cities, where there happen to be a lot of minorities, maybe there's a reason why it's like that. They're not educated. Why are they not educated? Because the educational system's not teaching them. That's a problem. So, you know, that's kind of why they don't understand these concepts, because nobody's taught them, nobody's bothered to say that they have the intellectual capacity to carry it out. One other foundational idea is the concept of the sovereignty of the states. We are one of the only countries in the world where we have a combined government. You know, the European Union is kind of like an idea that sort of wants to be like America. You know, the idea that you have sovereign states that work together. But we're the only nation in the world where we have a combined federal, somewhat central